So I've gotten a lot of questions about setting float height with the blow method. I was introduced to this method of setting float height with Kehin from HITLIS. As part of his Kinger jetting specs, he recommends the blow method to get an accurate float height. So a lot of people I talk to are not familiar with this. All you're going to need is, it makes it a lot easier to have a piece of fuel line to get your face kind of away from the carb. And then you're going to need to make this gauge at 7.5 millimeters. I can put some photos up on screen and some dimensions in the description about what this is going to look like. Basically, this is a really easy and accurate way to get your float height correct while you're doing this method. The other thing is you're going to want to make this out of some kind of tag board. The backside of a legal pad is what Tim says to make it out of. But this method for setting float height is applicable to any carb, really, because what you're doing is you're setting the float height to exactly where your needle is going to seal in the needle seat. As opposed to most methods rely on visibly just seeing roughly where it's seating, but not actually where it's seating. So what you're going to do is you want to attach the fuel line just enough to get a seal around the fuel inlet. So that's right enough right there. Then you're going to take your mouth, you're going to put on the other end, and you're going to blow into the fuel inlet with the float all the way down. While you're doing that, you want to actuate the float with your finger like this. See how it's resting on my finger? And you'll start to feel where it will fully seal from your air pressure. And that's exactly where you want the float height to be. It kind of takes a little bit to get the feel for it. So before you even worry about setting the height, just kind of practice this and get a feel for consistently finding that spot. Once you're able to find that spot, then you'll take your gauge and you kind of hold it while you actuate the float, and you can check where it's sealing in relation to the underside of this. That's going to be your true float height. So I'm going to check the float height on this real quick. So this float is a couple millimeters low, so we're going to make an adjustment and go from there. Just using a little pick, and we're going to pull the pin out of the float there, and then the float should just kind of drop out with the needle assembly attached. So you can see there's this small metal tab here. That metal tab is bendable, and that's what will determine your float height. All you're going to do is you're going to bend this up or down. In this configuration, if I grab a little flathead screwdriver and I pry up on it so that I bend it this way, what that'll do is your float will essentially sit like this, which is inverted from how it'll be in the bike. It'll actually sit a little bit higher, which right now is the adjustment that we need to make. So I'm just going to use a little pick here and just be gentle on this. I'm going to pry it. That's probably too big of an adjustment. I can use my finger. And this is just going to take trial and error to figure out what the right height is. The first time I did this, it probably took me 20-30 minutes to get my float height exactly how I want it. But the float height is going to be the basis for the Kinger jetting specs and for your jetting specs in general to work properly. It affects your fuel pressure, and it also affects how the bike will run in rough terrain, for better or for worse. Every bike is different, but for these specs, especially on the YZ, you're going to want to stick to that 7.5 millimeter. Right. So we made 3 or 4 adjustments, and now we got it sealing right at the point where it seals. So I'm going to try and show this here. So I hope that helps everyone. Like I say, it's a lot easier to show in a video than describe in a comments section. So feel free to ask any questions you might have. And yeah.